There are some really weird sewing hacks floating around, and today I'm putting them to the test. Some might be total game changers, and others might be total fails. Let's start testing. First up is this washable glue stick instead of basting stitches. The idea is to temporarily hold the fabric in place for things like zippers or matching stripes. Let's see if this does the trick. Let's take a look to see if this washable Elmer's glue will be a good substitute for a basting stitch, because we all try to sometimes avoid putting in a basting stitch. We just go ahead and plow through, and then we stitch, and then we have to like pull out. So this would just be a way to put, this is a little faster than a basting stitch. So if I put the glue here, and it washes out afterwards. So I'll put it nice layer there, and I'm going to be pretending I'm sewing this zipper in. So with zippers, you really do want to make sure you have the fabric doesn't move, because I drew this line here. I want it to line up. I'm pretending this line here is my waist seam. Often you'll have on your zipper, you'll have a waist seam going straight through, and it's very important that that waist seam lines up. So I just drew it on here to act as a waist seam. And so I want to make sure that that's still lined up after I sew. So I'm pressing down here. Let's take a look. It really does stick. It's completely sticking. So far so good. I'm happy with that. So I'll take this over the sewing machine, and then I'll sew that on, and we'll just make sure afterwards that this waist line is still aligned. You can see that nothing's moved around. My line is still in the same place where it was. This is my supposed waistline. It really worked quite nicely. I consider this an excellent option. Um, Not even just if you don't want to baste, but it really almost is faster and easier than basting. And then that glue will wash out. When you wash it, it'll be gone. So I love this. This is excellent. I'm going to put this in my repertoire of sewing options. Next, instead of using scissors to turn out your corners, I'm going to try a wooden dowel or a chopstick. Because let's be real, these sharp scissors can often poke right through the corner. So perhaps the wooden dowel will be a better tool. I sewed this up with just this one end open. We want to see when we turn it right side out if I can get really sharp corners. Typically I use my awl, which is very pointy, and it's very easy for it to poke through. Sometimes I use my scissors, which are very large, so that's a little challenging. Or if I have my seam ripper, I could use this too. Again, it pokes through, which you have to be careful about. But the advantage of these really sharp ones is you can get really into that corner. So let's see if this chopstick will work in order to do that. Turn it right side out. Let's get that chopstick in there. It's quite nice. It's very, stiff, so that's really nice. And it gets into the corner pretty well. I'm pretty happy with that. This one is, let's try, I was using that flat end, so let's use this end. This is a little bit bigger. And yeah, that end probably is a little bit better, so you should use the, obviously, I should have thought of that, this end is definitely better, but I think that gives a really nice turned edge. So I'm definitely keeping this one. There's no chance of poking a hole through the corners like there is with these sharper implements, and it really makes a nice crisp corner. You can see how beautiful that corner is. So this is, a keeper. This is a definite yes from me. Let's try medical fabric tape for marking our fabric. Sometimes our chalk is not dark enough or wipes away too quickly, and sometimes erasable pens don't always erase. So supposedly this medical paper tape is a great way to mark our fabric. Let's see. Let's see if this medical adhesive paper tape will serve as a good replacement for either a chalk pen or an erasable pen. Sometimes the chalk pen is not clear enough. Like if I drew this on here, it's not really, I can't really see it. I do have different colors, but you might just have one color and it's not very visible. Or perhaps you need to make sure that your erasable pen does actually erase. So you can see here, I put in my notches. I just made a little mark for at the end of the dart. So we're going to pretend we're going to sew in a dart. So I took a piece of tape, put it right there at that tip and come down there. Get another piece again at the tip so I can see that tip, and then right there to the notch. So I'm going to sew right in here for my dart, and so for my dart legs I can come in here, and then I know exactly where I need to sew. So let's go to the sewing machine and see how that works. I'm sewing right along that line, coming up to the point and right off the end. So there we go. The problem is that I sewed on the tape on the other side here because I didn't have it lined up perfectly. When I pin the fabric, I make sure that my pin goes right through the line on both sides. So the way I just folded this, I couldn't necessarily see, even though I tried to align it up here at the end, I didn't line it up perfectly. So it did go over a little bit, but not too much. I guess I could have been a little bit more careful with how I folded it. It did help me prevent not having to put pins in. And then if we pull this off, let's see if it pulls off this side. It does pull off that other side easily, but now I've sewn that down. Yeah, that's not going to work. It doesn't come out of it. So if you at all get over if you all sew onto it, it's not going to come off. That's just, I can't get that off. I'm not really sure I see the point of doing this because there's so many other options of ways to mark your lines or notches. I just don't see, and this tape is not inexpensive, so I really don't see using this as a maybe in a pinch, but I really can't see this as a viable option, so I will give it a fail. Using sandpaper to cut out slippery fabric. Let's be real, cutting out slippery, thin fabric can be a nightmare. Putting this underneath supposedly helps it from slipping and the ability to cut it out more easily. Let's put it to the test. I try to avoid a lot of slippery, silky fabrics because they're very, very challenging to work with. But if you do want to make something out of that type of fabric, like a chiffon or a very like thin silk, you need all these tips at your disposal to try to make it work. So this one is to put a piece of sandpaper. I would recommend using the whole sheet. It's a bigger piece, but this is what I have available. So you just put your silky fabric over your sandpaper. I'm just going to smooth it down to see if it holds in. So you can see if I pull it, it is actually holding the fabric down. So far so good. That's a very good sign. But if I lift it up, yeah, it's holding a little bit there too. So it is holding. Then we take, if I take my scissors and then I'd want to cut, I'm not going to cut through the sandpaper. I'm just you know, if I had to cut this fabric out along, you know, cut the pattern out, I would just cut like that, and you can see it really does hold it down so it's not slipping all over the place. If I didn't have the sandpaper underneath it, see, it's like when I'm holding it, I'm pulling it, and it doesn't really hold down as much. So I do think this is really nice to have a tool at your disposal. Keep a sheet or two of sandpaper in your toolbox for sewing, and it really does help make cutting out this thin fabric a lot easier. But I would warn you to not cut through the sandpaper because it'll absolutely ruin your scissors. I wouldn't even cut through it with my paper scissors, so definitely don't do that. But it's a wonderful tool to keep this slippery fabric in place. So I give this a thumbs up. Using dental floss to get strong gathering stitches. Often when you're trying to gather the fabric, the gathering threads will break. It's so frustrating. Supposedly, if you zigzag over top this dental floss, it'll be a really strong way to make your gathers. Let's try it out. Okay, I'm going to take a piece of floss and put it there and try to stay within my seam allowance. Put the zigzag stitch on. I think it's going to be a little hard to keep sewing over this, but let's give it a try. Okay, there we go. I'm going to make my zigzag stitch a little wider to make it a little easier to sew and a little longer. There we go. So I made the zigzag stitch the widest and longest I can go. Just want to make sure I'm not sewing over the, I don't want to sew the floss, otherwise I won't be able to pull it through, which is a little challenging. You have to be a very good seamstress to get this. So, okay, sorry if my hand was in the way, but it was a very delicate situation. I'll take it over to the table and we'll take a look at it there. It might be a little easier at the table. Okay, so I took my floss and I tried to keep it within the seam line, which was a little challenging because my seams are typically a half an inch. So I think I might have just accomplished that. And I took the zigzag stitch, I made it the widest and the longest I could, because when I started, it was very much narrower, and I think that would be more harder. First of all, I want to get this done faster, because it was a little challenging staying aligned up along this floss, because I didn't want to sew onto the floss. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to pull it through. So let's see if I've accomplished that. I think you have to be a very steady hand and sew very accurately to make this work. So here we go. Let's see if it works. Okay, it definitely does work. I'm making it, yes, it's beautiful. It does make a beautiful gather there, no problem. But I don't think I will substitute this with my regular method, because I typically do 2 basting stitches within my seam line. They're like usually very quick to, you know, add. And then I'm very, very careful when I'm pulling. And occasionally I do, you know, break one of the basting threads. You always have the other one, and you can also either sew over that one little spot if you really, you know, have lost both of them. But I find I can usually make it work with just the one extra one. So, and I typically am gentle, so I don't break them at all. So this works, but I think it would be expensive use of if I was gathering like my 3-tier skirt where I have 3 tiers of gathers and they get very long. I'd probably use an entire thing of floss in order to do this. So I don't really think that's very practical. So while it worked, I will not be adding this to my repertoire. So I will call it a fail in terms of moving forward with this trick. And using one of my tea towels as a pressing cloth to prevent my fabric from getting scorched or shiny. Let's see if this is a good idea. So if you have a more delicate fabric that could potentially scorch or burn or melt or potentially get that sheen over it, which I just hate, you'd want to do something to protect it. I'm using cotton right now, so none of those things apply, but this is just for illustration purposes. So the tip is to take just a tea towel that you have in your kitchen and use it as a press cloth. So you can put it under here and then you can iron it and it'll save it from getting any of those things I mentioned: burnt, scorched, a sheen on it, any of those things. Now, this tea cloth is pretty thick, so it's going to take a little extra time to press something, but um, you just take your time and get it warmed up. So it is taking a little bit long because this is very, very thick. And I think most of us like to have thick tea towels, right? Because I don't want a super thin tea towel. I like mine a little thicker. So this one would not be my choice for a press cloth. The tea towels that I have in my kitchen. But if it's the only thing I had, I would definitely use it because it's better than you can absolutely not put your iron right up to your fabric. It will, see, I still have all these. It is a little warm, so I might have to work it for a while, but it's going to take a while to use something so thick. So this would not be my choice. What I use instead is a piece of clear silk. So the silk is very durable, and then when I put it down, I can see exactly what I'm doing underneath it. So this is my choice for a press cloth. But you can use almost anything for a press cloth, right? Like anything that you have, it's better than ironing right on some delicate fabric. So it just might take a little longer. But I would try to find, perhaps you have tea towels that are a little thinner, and I would recommend those. So you can see it still has a few wrinkles in here, but this definitely made it a lot easier to, it's thinner, so the heat transfers better, and I can just see what I'm doing. I don't like to have a opaque press cloth. I just don't know what I'm doing. I could have a wrinkle underneath there and I wouldn't even know it. So, yep, there I got it all out. So this would be my recommendation. A clear, if you, I don't think you have a clear tea towel, but a tea towel is definitely something to use if that's all you have. 100%, I would recommend a tea towel. But if you have something sheer, I would recommend that even more. Will straws and a knitting needle help us turn through those really skinny straps? What a nightmare when you want to make spaghetti straps and you have to turn those little tiny inside out. So this supposedly is a real game changer by putting the straw into the strap and pushing through with the needle. Let's see if this works. I have never actually, I don't think so. I don't think I've ever made spaghetti straps. Perhaps I have. I don't recall ever doing so. I do have to turn through some narrow things in the past, like a belt would be probably the narrowest one I've turned through. But with spaghetti straps, you have very, very small, tunnel, and trying to pull this through is extremely difficult. So this trick is to use a straw to insert into the strap and then push through with the knitting needle. So let's give this a try. I brought 2 different straws. This is a plastic straw and this is a paper straw. This one's a little narrower, but I would think the plastic straw would probably work better just because it's firmer. So let's start with that one. So I'm going to put that in there. It just barely fits. So that's why having 2 straws would probably be a good idea. Very, very tight. Let's try this one. Oh yeah, that one's so good to have a thinner straw. Okay, so then we're going to, I think what we're going to do is push this fabric through like this. Just keep bringing it up, I guess, and pushing it through. Yeah, I'm struggling here. The paper straw is bending too. Oh, this is why I don't do spaghetti straps. This is extremely challenging. Yeah, this is, other people may have had more success with this, but I am not having success. Let me try. It definitely got some of it in there, but I just can't push it through. I don't know if it's because I have a paper straw, which is bending all over the place. See, it's stuck in there. I can't even get it out now. Well, I am going to give this a fail. I think other people might be able to accomplish this. I cannot. It's too frustrating. I'm just going to not do spaghetti straps. I know that. Or if I was going to do them, I would just fold them under and then top stitch. I think that's the way I would do my spaghetti straps, not turning them right side out. So I'm going to give me a fail on this. And I don't have enough patience to keep trying to do this. If you don't have a rotary cutter, will a pizza cutter work? I have my doubts, but let's give it a try. So many of us probably do have a rotary cutter, but if you're just new to sewing and you don't have one, I definitely prefer to cut my fabric out this way. But let's see if just a regular pizza cutter would do the job. I'm sort of skeptical about this, but let's just see. Nope, not even close. It's definitely not sharp enough to cut through the fabric, so I give this a big fail. So if you have the rotor cutter, is very, very sharp, much, much sharper than you can see how easily that cuts out. So definitely you cannot use your pizza cutter to cut your fabric. Sometimes needle threading can be very challenging. Will this sponge help make it easier? Let's find out. This one seems super impractical, but the internet says it's really amazing, so let's give it a whirl. The idea is to take your thread and to press it into a damp sponge and then thread it right after that. Okay, so I did thread it easily, but I typically can thread a needle pretty easily, so I don't really see a difference, honestly. Now, I do know the tips that I use if I'm having trouble threading a needle is to cut on an angle. So I get, first of all, if it's frayed on the end, it gets a nice clean cut. And if I cut at an angle, it just sort of angles it up ever so slightly. And if I do have thread that seems to have a lot of little hairs, I do the saliva, I do lick it, I put it in my mouth. So it's probably not something that you would do if you're making something for someone else, but I only make clothes for myself. So that's my method. I don't think it's practical that I'm going to have a sponge sitting around in my craft room that's damp, then I'm going to put it on. So I think my favorite tip is to cut with the scissors to get a nice crisp edge at an angle. That would be my number one tip. So I'm going to give this a fail. It's sort of neutral. I don't think it does anything. So I would not recommend keeping a sponge in your sewing space. Okay, I was not expecting some of these to work out as well as they did. Which one was your favorite? Let me know in the comments below. If you want to hear more about advice I wish I ignored check out this video here. If you've enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe.